welcome to this panel discussion. We were just shortly before the meeting discussing what topics we will talk about, so I will keep it as a surprise. We have 5 speakers. It's Jirka Brunslik from Product Board, Tomáš Ružička, same, also from Product Board, David Nečvařík from Red Hat, Luboš Houšel, and Andy from Honeycomb. And my name is Richard Vojta. I'm the Prague DevOps Meetup organizer. This is the 5th meetup online, and I didn't count how many meetups we had offline, and hopefully we'll switch back to offline or a hybrid after the pandemic situation will get better. If you have any questions, there's a link in Slido. Yes, thank you, Pavel. Or you can write your question into the chat, or you can raise your hand. But we will mainly focus for the time for speakers, and when there will be a break during the discussion, I can give you a word and you can ask a question. So this event should take 2 hours, and I think now is exactly 5 minutes past 7, so we can slowly start. And we will start with the introduction. I already introduced myself. My name is Richard Vojta, and I will pass the word to Andy from Honeycomb.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for your time. Andy Hawkins. I've been a practitioner in DevOps and related technologies, having been a systems integrator for many years. Now I'm leading the observability march with Honeycomb in Europe. Richard, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, David. Sorry, thank you, Andy, David.
Okay, hi, I'm David. I now work at Red Hat, and currently I am looking for adoption of OpenShift and basically our automation journeys. So both OpenShift and Ansible. So that's quick for me.
Okay, thank you, David. Luboš?
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here. I'm Luboš. I'm currently working at Barclays, even though I haven't officially put it on the invite. I've been working there for 13 years, and at the moment I'm working in CTO office, Chief Technology Office, and in a DevOps and a strategy lead position. So essentially trying to help 20,000 engineers in a big financial institution to become a little bit more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Luboš. Jirka?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jirka. I work as Director of Engineering at Product Board, and I take care of all the internal platform teams.
Thank you. And the last one is Tomáš.
Hello, everyone. Tomáš, also from Product Board. I'm a staff engineer in one of our tribes, taking care of architecture and everything related.
Okay, and so now the surprise, what will be the topics? The main topic is the existence of platform team, which I understood is like the very good way for adoption of the DevOps for the companies. And the second topic was outages in production, and the side topics are DevOps versus SRE relation. But I think we will mention it to the because it's very related to the first topic of the platform teams, and it also covers the last topic, which is what's your organization approach to DevOps. And I think I can pass word to Andy.
Yeah, when we started discussing these topics, it was quite interesting to me, and centered on the existence of platform teams as being something that is of particular interest. I've worked with a number of organizations over the years as they've been doing DevOps, but I've seen the change in the sort of infrastructure that we're running and the complexity increasing. You look at things like Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes, or the range of services you can get from any of the cloud providers. The range is simply astonishing. And many of these platforms are incredibly complex, but there's still the rush to get applications into production and make them reliable, but also deliver revenue. So when the emergence of the platform team was something I first noticed, it just made sense. It's a team that's aligned to each of the streams of work and really takes all of the hard graft out, making sure you've got properly provisioned platforms that scale, making sure that the subordinate systems like CI/CD and source management are all there and working for you. It takes the cognitive load off the stream aligned teams. So it makes a huge amount of sense to me. And I've seen it being adopted pretty much across the industry. So that's something I'm passionate about. And then whilst the key topics were outages in production, I was asked about what's my approach to DevOps. And I spent a long time as a practitioner and felt in many ways that I'd adopted DevOps principles from the get-go. I worked as a systems integrator. I worked with customers to design, build, and operate platforms for them. And to do that, it was very important that we aligned a culture with the customer to build the right thing, but also thought through all of the tooling and the various ideas in order to get customers productive. So to me, the biggest things were the transition of people. I worked with a lot of architects and infrastructure engineers. There were always some people in my team who said, we can do this better. And that wasn't a complaint. That was a series of ideas coming down from them. And they became the natural people I turned to become my DevOps engineers. Go out with the right approach, talk to people and solve problems. And it served me very, very well for a number of years. I still think culture is at the heart of everything to do with DevOps.
Thank you, Andy. I'll be moderating this discussion. So initially I will be passing the word and then we'll get started automatically. So next speaker will be David.
Okay. So for me, if I will do it a little bit vice versa, because I will probably start with why DevOps, in what it means for me and for Red Hat and how we are typically addressing it. Because I think that if you look on the second question or third one, the outages or the platform teams, to be able to even run DevOps, you need to have platform teams. That's something I am now working in my head and to describe it. So what DevOps means to me and how we are typically approaching is that DevOps is nothing like tools. It's nothing like people. It's nothing like application design, because it's all of this mixed together. And it's pretty abstract topics. And I think that if we ask 1,000 people, we will have 1,000 opinions. But if we look how we can have common goal is to speak what we want to achieve with DevOps. And it's typically the streamlined application deployment, robust platforms, and changing the way how we are working. And I think that if we think about it from different perspective, if we have common goals and we have set of tools and resources we can use for it, so we need some processes or something, some cookbook, and that's what DevOps could be. Because from my perspective, DevOps can be a way how you address the issues and how you will be solving them in an automated way. And for me, typical DevOps practitioner should be that he should automate himself of his job and look for another job to do. And if we have this mentality in the organization, and on one side we have application development in more agile way, on other side we still have something like operations. And it didn't work very well. But if you change the mentality from the operations people to something like platform teams, platform responsible people, it will slowly start working together, because you will create the better interface, how application people and how developers can communicate with the platform. Because it's pretty hard to communicate from application perspective to some operation perspective, some operating system details. But now with Kubernetes and clouds and this stuff, we are building platforms. And if the operational people are the providers of these platforms, they have much better topics, because they do not care about how to say how many servers are there, what kind of storage is there attached. But you are saying, okay, my application needs how, for example, 4 CPU cores, 4 gigs of memory to run. And basically, if we have platform, the platform team will say, okay, yes, we have capacity there, throw our code here, and we will somehow run it. You can look at some theory in IT. I think if you look at Kubernetes, it's built on the promise theory, but we're probably not going to this much detail. But to get back to what's the platform purpose, for me, it's to create platform teams to change the perspective of the operational people, that they are not here only to install operating system, but they are here to provide platform where application can be run. And basically, if you change this in the mind of a person, he will slowly start to behave differently, and that can start the DevOps adoption, because these people will understand more what the organizations want from them. And that's big culture change, because if you look at history, how we were working, how there were a lot of silos, we were developing this in the organizations. Now we are trying to connect the people more together. We call it DevOps, we call it Agile, we have some frameworks how to do this, but in reality, it's about changing our mindset. So for me, probably the most important part about DevOps is how we are thinking about our works, that we are not thinking how to fix the server, but how to provide the robust platform that my colleague who is developing application can quickly use.
Okay, thank you, David. And I pass the word to Luboš.
Okay, so I kind of like the way David approached the question, and I'll probably do something similar as well. Like, what does DevOps really mean to me? And I really like that we're probably from similar firms at the moment. Like, we probably would both call our employers as corporations, even though obviously we're probably in different business. But to me, like DevOps is, I would actually use Red Hat definition, right? Like I think if I just literally Google Red Hat sort of website, would they sort of talk about DevOps? That to me is probably the closest, right? It's DevOps is like a philosophy, right? It's really just a set of principles that, you know, you can go 50 years back, 60 years back, you know, as Andy said, you know, many people have been probably practitioners of DevOps for years. And obviously listing them all here would just take a lot of time, but some of the most basic ones that I'm really passionate about and I really try to, you know, spread the word about is obviously very old people, process tools, right? Behaviors, processes, technology. And these three kind of working in you know, equally important, all of these three being sort of balanced out. Then some sort of easy ones like eat your undercooked food, simplicity, right? Can I sort of simplify what I do? But to me, like personally, what I find the most sort of important in all of this is not just looking at sort of myself, right? What can I do in my daily job, but how do I help others that they think the same? So really the mindset. I think that's what resonates with me the most from what you know, David said. So it's really, that's what I find is the most interesting. Like when you look at a firm like my employer, 80,000 employees, 90,000 employees, 20,000 engineers out of that group. And of course, especially if you have non-technical, you know, employees, perhaps in some of the, you know, other parts of the organization, you know, like typical corporations have like risk and controls and security teams. And maybe not all of them are, you know, that sort of modern yet and thinking about, you know, DevSecOps principles and whatnot. And that really becomes interesting then, right? How do you communicate across the group? How do you embrace these principles across the group? How do you explain that fast doesn't always means bad, right? It's as long as there's codified guidelines. So I think, yeah, DevOps is just huge, right? I think it's it doesn't really matter what employer is applying and embracing DevOps principles. I would almost argue that the bigger the firm, the bigger the outcome and potential positive impact can be, right? So if you save 2 minutes of every engineer's time every day, then of course the volume counts, right? If you have 80,000 employees, you do the math, how much time you're actually saving. So, but yeah, I can go on, you know, talking about DevOps here for years. I've called myself a DevOps evangelist on sort of LinkedIn. But I guess, you know, the topics, yeah, I find them sort of all really equally important. I'm in the same camp as sort of Andy and David, and I think others on this call that, yeah, I also ran myself a platform team, which I do still run the platform team that I set up in the past. I definitely agree, you know, it's very important. And I think, you know, on top of everything that was said so far, I feel one important element as well of the team is consultancy, right? So it's not just about, say, the infrastructure, running it, doing a glue between engineering and whatever the service provider is doing, but really also helping engineers or anyone else, right? Just with following best practice and stuff like that. So I definitely agree. Platform team is very important. And yeah, second topic was really more like opening the topic of SRE and DevOps and its relevance. So all I can say is that we as a firm, I think, are still fairly new to SRE. We'll just start to adopt it. I see, at least from the requirements perspective, it's very similar skill set that we are looking for. So I'm hoping, or I'm thinking that many of the DevOps engineers we have can really just do the job as well. But of course, the actual content of the job itself is a little bit different. So I'm also looking forward to this topic and what all more can we collectively learn. So that'll be from me. So back to you, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Bosch. And now Jirka.
Yeah, so if I go back to the topic of the platform teams, so far it feels like we've been touching this topic only in the context of infrastructure. How I perceive the platform teams is that this is something that is much broader than just infrastructure. Because what's the purpose of the platform teams? It's to enable the product teams or the streamlined teams, if you wish, to be as efficient as possible, to ship out features with the highest velocity that is achievable in the given context. And as Andy was saying, the complexity of the systems keeps growing and growing, and it would be wasteful if all those streamlined teams had to understand how to set up their compute clusters, how to set up their own CI/CD pipelines, etc. But it just doesn't stop there. You have complex topics like if you run single page applications, you probably want to have certain division of those applications by specific domains, which means that you need a platform team that will take care of the application shell and allow all the micro frontends to integrate into it. So in our context, the product board, we also have a team called Frontend Platform, which goes well beyond the infrastructure topics. And in general, it's about abstracting complexity, taking it away from the developers so that they can focus on their core mission and on delivering the value for their customers. So I think it's super important to realize that if we are talking about platform teams, it's not just the bare bones. It's not just your Kubernetes clusters and different AWS resources. You can bring a lot of value if you are touching components that are on the higher levels of the software architecture.
Thank you. And Tomáš?
Yeah, many things have been already said. So to not repeat it, I'll probably add a few more that I don't think anybody mentioned yet. Since our company is pretty heavy on product thinking, as our name kind of suggests, we always trying to think about the users, the customers of the product that we're building, but we're also pretty heavy on developer happiness inside our company. And so we essentially just treat our engineers inside the company as another type of user or customer. And that's, I think, the mindset that sort of is connected with this idea of platform teams. And I think it's really helpful sort of framework how to think about it. And in the end, the decision then is how many more engineers do you actually want building the product for the engineers that actually build the product that you actually sell. That's the I guess the hard question, right? So yeah, I'll leave that one open.
Okay. My question is there any anti-pattern to the platform team that companies should avoid? What are the basic mistakes when building the platform team? Andy?
I think communication and a conduit between the streamlined teams and the platform teams is absolutely critical. Removing all of the barriers and establishing a common framework, a common language so that people can talk to one another. I've seen people implementing technologies because they've heard that they perhaps need to have a streaming architecture, yet they've implemented the wrong sorts of technology. So it's a common language that people can engage around. And aligned business goals. Availability is the classic that we've talked about in the past, but a 99.99% availability means nothing if you're not measuring the right things for the business. So that openness of communication, and we talked a little bit about SRE and DevOps a few moments ago. One of the great patterns is actually, to pick up on David's point, having a consulting mindset, in order that the platform team can do just that. They can consult with the stakeholders, and the stakeholders consult with the platform teams. So it all comes down to that sort of communication channel and the freedom with which you can make changes and make decisions, because frankly, in this world, pretty much everything is an experiment. You've got to get really, really quick feedback loops, and I'm going to hand it off to somebody else there.
So who would you nominate as your follower, and what would be your question to him?
Well, we talked a little bit about everybody, the argument of not everybody can become Google earlier. Mm-hmm. And Lubos gave a sort of a scenario, and I was wondering whether Lubos might pick it up, because you're in a very large organization. Communication is key, and the more mouths make communication more difficult.
Yep. So I guess that's more like open point, right? But I get it. Communication is definitely key. Like what I really liked, what was mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is that really looking at engineers as customers, right? And almost in a way, it's all the same topic. But if I go back to Richard and his question about anti-pattern, I would say anti-pattern can really be a platform team that just doesn't listen to engineers. You know, that they're thinking they know the best. They're thinking, okay, we know what the latest greatest is. We don't care what you really want. That I think I've seen many times over and over. That, you know, maybe they mean well, right? They may sort of try to look ahead, to try to sort of think a little bit ahead. But if they are not cognitive, and especially at large organizations, don't realize the complexity of technology in general, right? You do have still mainframes. You have like it's huge. I can just talk about here for hours. So what sort of technology spread we have. So it's obviously very, very hard to be one person or one team and kind of know everything. But really, anti-pattern I have seen is you know, when people are not good active listeners, don't treat engineers as customers, and don't try to do their best to really sort of help them. That's what I think does hurt a lot. You know, you then end up with platform team that's meant to be making things easier. Maybe they're doing things easier, but for 1% of technology, which of course then your ROE or your investment is really just going south. So yeah. So, and that's pretty much communication, right, Andy? So it's you know, I think the 2 years, 1 month, definitely. You know, I'm sort of always sort of talking to everyone. That's what I want to do all the time. That's what I have been just doing in my new role, right? For the last half a year, I have spoken to so many people there. So it's I think communication is definitely a very important topic.
I will pass the word to Tomáš, who's raising his hand.
Yeah, I think I have another sort of example of what can go wrong, and it's maybe a little bit opposite of what Lubos was just describing, but it's also bad. Is actually when the platform teams or any of the platform teams becomes sort of a throwaway team for the work that doesn't really fit anywhere. And like, I mean, I guess this happens when you really don't adopt the idea of the platforms as a product idea, right? And then sort of the main work of that team becomes like 90% sort of business as usual type of stuff, like, you know, like provisioning, you know, I don't know, and like all this just stuff that never ends. And it really, really, really hinders the amount of innovation that you can make inside the company. And like basically, like you're just, it's, I don't know if it's a fault of culture or maybe org design or just simple prioritization, but I've definitely seen this anti-pattern to also emerge.
Yeah, I've been through this a lot because I was working as an SRE, and people usually think that this is the development work and this is the SRE work. So everything which was not the development was an SRE. So, Irka?
Yeah, also it's a super valid point. Also related to this topic is what I've often seen is that the platform teams are heavily understaffed and underinvested because the leadership does not recognize the value of such teams. They look at them and see, these are not developers who would be shipping customer-facing features. Why should we pay them? And they don't realize the immense potential of the efficiency and velocity boost those teams can bring to the business and how it can brutally accelerate the things and the delivery. So it's necessary to talk to all the stakeholders and explain why such investment in the platform teams makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you, David. You're muted.
Sorry, and I would totally agree there because if you look on what the platforms can provide as a value, even for developers, and a nice example of this is this, if you look before the Christmas and Log4j vulnerabilities. And if you will be thinking about this twice, it was causing a lot of issues for a lot of companies. But in reality, this should be some part of this part of logging should be part of the platform. There is probably no need in the modern platform for every application to have such complex library in. And these are also the stuff how the communication is really important, because sometimes you need to reflect the platform in the application architecture. So it's not only that developers are the customers for the platform, but they also should be educated, and they also should be speaking with the platform teams about the possibilities, about removing the boilerplate code and removing the unnecessary stuff from the application architecture, because that's something we are seeing more and more, because our applications are getting more complex. But sometimes even if you are decomposing them, the sum of the platform complexity stays in the applications.
Yeah, I will pass forward to Luboš and unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay. I just want to react to what Jiří said before, because I think that's a very, very interesting topic, like especially in a sort of large firm where you have so many sort of employees. It's really obviously easy on paper, as Jiří said, like, okay, what are these team doing? We don't understand. They're not delivering to the business. Let's just cut the budget there. We'll just save money. On paper, we'll all look good. And it's, putting ourselves into their shoes, it kind of makes sense from their perspective, right? But the beauty is kind of, explaining this to them. So, and I don't know what was, experience of you guys, in especially big firms, but what seemed to start working, I don't want to sort of call it a success yet, but what seemed to start working well is, again, using my favorite Google Dora sort of, example, and the white paper they put together after the DevOps survey, which essentially talks about value add versus cost reduction, right? The classical battle. So in other words, basically trying to explain to senior management, yes, on paper you're saving, I don't know, £10,000. In reality, you're wasting £2 million per year, because essentially your developer productivity goes down by 20% by doing this, right? And that's, I guess, very complex. I don't know what your experience, guys, is, but try to draw a correlation that this money saved here will lead to lead time decrease or whatever. It's very, very hard. But it's again more culture, and I'm trying to kind of use that example in our firm as well, case by case. Yes, you're saving X amount of money here, but in the long term, you're losing, and that seemed to start working. So something I also want to raise as an interesting observation in a large firm.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I put my hand up, and then I think Luboš circled around and said what I was going to in a way. I think very few people have an appropriate mechanism for measuring progress, and Accelerate offers some great ideas for that. And Thomas brought another point up earlier about developers being users of a platform, but the amount of toil that people have to go through in order to get their work done can be quite debilitating. And Pavel raised the question around data-driven decisions around platform teams. One of the pieces of work that I've read recently is by Matthew Skelton and some of the work he's done with team topologies, which gives some great data and ideas to act upon. So I think there is a body of evidence building, but it's still relatively early. I think people are still trying to work out what the right things are to measure in order to improve performance. But this is an art that is changing constantly, and SRE is helping. But we all latch on to new things very, very quickly. Sometimes we've got to give ideas the chance to stick and to measure them before making a sort of an experiment, a determination the experiment is a success or needs to be refined.
Okay, thank you, David.
Yeah, and maybe I would expand this topic about some observation I find out, because if we are speaking about productivity and all this stuff and about measuring, what I find out, and it's typically related, is that we are sometimes speaking about technological debt, which is pretty nice abstraction how to explain to business people who are driven by money that we have something we will have to pay because we decide to deliver something more quicker. But what I learned, and by heart, is that it's not debt in the money. It's not the same, because you cannot pay technological debt in the small payment. It's typically never work. And if you look at it from a money perspective, the interest rate is so much over the sky. And that's something we need to be very careful when we are talking to the senior management, because sometimes saying, okay, we will create this feature fast and it will cost us something. But sometimes if it's in development, it means that you will need to develop it again. So maybe you are buying some time, but in the end, it can cost you a lot. But on the other hand, the cost of not having this feature can be even higher. So sometimes it's pretty hard to think about this and how to explain to the people who doesn't know anything about the IT, about how the applications are developed, how they are deployed, how the platforms are run. And this is very tricky, how to do this in a very correct way.
Okay, thank you, David. We had some questions in the Slido, so let's pick the top one. Is what will be your opinion to the next big thing for the industry? And I think we can do the round and then follow on the discussion. And yeah, and then we can answer the other questions. So Andy, what will be your opinion on the next big thing for the industry?
Gee, this is one where I wanted to be last, so I could say just what he said. Okay, so my thought is this, that security in the enterprise is still lagging behind the innovation of product teams and various other things. There are a number of innovative approaches to securing cloud platforms and various other endpoints and various other things. In a way, I think probably one of the big things is modernizing the security space. So it's almost, we've had infrastructure as code, perhaps security as code or security as policy, and an uplift of the skills within the security teams such that they aren't in a position where they just say, no, that isn't going to come through here, such that they become the problem solvers. So I think security in this modern cloud native world is the area that's going to change most, because there are some really interesting drivers out there to make that happen.
Okay, thank you, David.
For me, it's very hard to answer, because to be honest, if we know that, I think that we will be building that. But if I look what's happened in the past years, first Docker came and totally changed how we are develop application. Then Kubernetes came and demonstrated how we can run these applications in a very complex environment, how we can run them at scale. And I think that what we are now missing is that how to manage this complexity, how to make sure that our applications are running correctly, that they are good in the shape. So I think it will be more about how to say nailing observability and removing complexity from the application and platform design. So some way how to abstract it. That's my guess. I don't know how to solve it, but I think that we will have to go in this area.
Okay, thank you. And I think we will skip to another question. So where do you see the main blocker for bigger adoption of DevOps practices?
I mean, if I go back one question, my simple answer to the biggest blocker would be people. I feel like it's always about people, right? People are the biggest blocker, and that might sound harsh, but I think you kind of sort of nail it. It doesn't mean that people are bad or mean, but often in my experience, they just don't realize it. They don't realize it. They're holding themselves back, right? Because they think maybe about things a little bit differently, or maybe the way they have been thinking about this for the last 20 years, right? And Luboš, tell me, why should I change the way I approach this? So simple answer is sort of people. But then going back to your question, it's yeah, I don't think he sort of meant it sort of verbally, right? That it will be literally, yeah, it's your fault. That's obviously not what he was saying, but I think his main thought was that it's the accountability where it's clear in which team, which lead, is kind of responsible. It's easier to then sort of make things better, right? If you have federated ownership, it's obviously harder. But of course, it comes with an art again on this point around communication, right? So you shouldn't be anytime in any role as a manager, you shouldn't be going there and say, Jiří, you fucked up. That's what you did is wrong. Absolutely not, right? You should just, okay, this is what happened. Let's do official root cause analysis, post-mortem, right? What have you learned from this? So definitely blameless retrospectives, all the best practice we all know that should be sort of used, right? But it's more about the fact that you then clearly know where the accountability sits, where it needs to be fixed, right? As opposed to okay, I don't know where to do that. So, but you're spot on, Richard. This can obviously also be done wrong, right? So managers can be happy. Yes, finally now I can throw that guy under the bus.
Yeah, I like the comparison of two words: accountability and responsibility. I think the accountable is always the code that somebody wrote for some hardware issue or something, and the responsible is the person who is able to respond to the outage or something, so we can like switch back to the incidents in production or something. But let's move to the next question. What was your hardest decision, compromise you had to make in relation to practice tooling, etc., and why? Tomáš?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what it was. I think I already mentioned it. I mean, actually, the math or sort of the resource allocation, whether you're supposed to hire an extra dev engineer or you hire an extra, platform engineer is just the hard one. Because as we've already described a number of times, of course, you always want, higher velocity and you want more features, and so sort of the most straightforward answer, oh, we need more product engineers, of course. And the platform is sort of invisible in that answer. But like once you start realizing, oh, I actually need platform, but then how many people should I have in that platform, right? Like how big the platform team should be compared to how the whole engineering organization is, large. And I think this is hard.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
I'm going to almost turn the question in on itself. The hardest decision is making a decision. In small organizations, it can seem easy. We're going to go Puppet, Chef, Ansible. Okay, cool. In large organizations, different teams will have a different philosophy, and we all advocate that you should be able to make a decision that works for your team. But as you get higher in an organization, having that diversity is a problem. And that's coupled with the fact that things change so quickly. I mentioned obviously the configuration management tools earlier, but then you bring Terraform and other things into the frame. For me, the hardest thing is making a decision probably needs to be done at a departmental or a product level and allow people to do the right things. But that in itself becomes a pyramid that you've got to manage as you go forward.
Okay, thank you. Luboš?
So for me, the hardest decision is actually something I'm literally right now going through, right? And it's one of those that, as Andy said, probably the big one, right? Because I'm going to be influencing 20,000 engineers in a firm, and that on its own is just heavy, right, on my sort of shoulders. So I definitely, agree with sort of Andy. That's not an easy decision to make, right? Because irrespective of what decision I'm gonna make, I know there are gonna be people who will disagree with me, right? That there are gonna be people who just say, okay, Luboš, you haven't thought it through. We are doing this, and we are kind of special. And it's really, I'll maybe combine this question and answer with the previous question about the 2 questions back about what do I see as a trend, right? Because if I just look what I think will kind of be evolving a lot is kind of the whole area around GitOps, so Argo CD and other tools there, where you kind of almost eliminate the need to have CI/CD whatsoever and just treat everything as code, the intellectual property itself. That's what I foresee will be the kind of the future, where eventually we just stop sort of thinking about all these design CI/CD sort of capabilities and tools. But in a way, I was at the same time the one who had to say no to such a tool in our firm recently. So that was a difficult decision for me because even though I personally like it, I would like to sort of explore, these new technologies. At the same time, I'm cognitive of the fact that in our large organization, we have lots of snowflakes, lots of diverse CI/CD pipelines we have to consolidate. So I really need to start working first on what we have, consolidated that before moving to something more exciting. So yeah, decision where I may be seen as killing innovation. That's probably the hardest one I have to do so far.
Thank you. I give myself a word. For making decisions, I come during to the answer while reading the book about extreme programming. The name is Extreme Programming Explained, and it was comparing the way how the team or managers are making the decisions. They usually have meetings and meetings and meetings over the meetings, and the extreme programming approach is you have 3 alternatives, try them all, measure them, and then pick one. So it should be like data driven, and you should reduce the time spent on decision to just like minimal, like 15 minutes, and then go and start coding something. So that's my 5 cents to this question. Tomáš.
Yeah, I just realized another one because I just noticed that in the question there's compromise. As an architecture guy, I quickly got to learn that like making decisions is all about trade-offs, right? And so, you of course want to make the lives of your engineers as easy as possible and like have the highest velocity possible. But then you have all sorts of constraints coming in, right? You have security constraints, you have scalability constraints, you have cost constraints. And so I think it's really, really, really hard to balance all of the important characteristics that you want your culture or your architecture to have, right? So, for example, when we talk specifically about developer experience or the processes and tooling that we can implement, and like the sort of auditability or somehow sort of certified, or if you're trying to get an audit, right, you're going to be restricted in many different ways. For example, when we are going through SOC2, like it's not that they're trying to tell you that explicitly that this is the tool that you should use, but they're trying to direct you in a direction where your processes and your tooling is just secure. But in reality, when you look for the tools that you could be using to solve those problems, it's really, really hard, and you really need to ask yourself like really big questions like, how much would it cost if this specific thing happens, and what does that cost compare to having our engineers, a bit less happy or slower in the end. So this is really hard.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to the next question in the chat by Philip. So what do you think about the paved road approach pushed by Netflix, IIRC, where the platform teams are basically responsible for building the happy path story for other teams building features? Where do you think that the happy path should end, and how should that end look like for both the features and platform teams? So raise your hands and I will give you a word. You can raise your hand on camera, I can see you. David? Sorry, Jirka.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
David, did you raise the hand?
No, it's just because the icon, the notification icon is in the middle, and I see it like, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So how I'm looking at things is that we, as the platform organization, we provide the product teams or the stream aligned teams the paved road, and for a given problem, we have a solution that you should use in the majority of cases. But that doesn't mean that you need to use it in like 100% of cases, because we optimize for, let's say, majority of the problems that you are trying to tackle. But there will always be edge cases where our solution doesn't scale or doesn't match the security compliance requirements or the capacity needs or whatever. And I believe in such case, the product teams need the autonomy to choose an alternative. So the fact that you have the platform teams and the internal products that you are offering doesn't mean that like everybody suddenly needs to use what you are giving them, even if it doesn't match their specific requirements for their specific use case. Obviously, if you do the exception, it should be well thought out and well justified. But yeah, if you need something special, sure, just go for it.
Thank you, Luboš.
Yeah, I think Iri pretty much nailed it, but it also reminds me the golden cage versus golden path, right? Analogy that maybe some of you also heard before. I feel, what I'm observing, in our firm as well across engineers is that lots of people perceive this as kind of locking things down, right? Don't take the flexibility from me. I want to do stuff sort of my own way. But I think it's exactly as Iri mentioned, right? It's more like this is the default. This is, by default, you go this way. You don't have to figure this out on your own. Engineers in this firm have already figured out how to do this in a compliant way with all the regulations. You don't have to worry about it. It just works. That's the path for you. If you don't like it for whatever reason, you can diverse, but then you're accountable, right? As you said a couple of minutes ago, you're then accountable for the solution. You need to make sure you're meeting all the regulations, whatever. So, be sure to, have a strong case, right? Because then you probably have to talk to your manager, explain why you kind of have to diverse. So I think, yeah, what Netflix is doing, long story short, I think makes sort of sense. It's just, next chapter, I would say, in sort of, CI/CD. If I think about this, it's almost like if I go back 20, 30 years in software development, right? We all learned, object-oriented programming, and we started with inheritance and whatnot. And later on, we started sort of more, high-level sort of principles. And this is kind of similar, right? It doesn't mean that there's going to be 4 paved roads for all of teams within a large organization, right? The number of paved roads can be almost infinite, and anyone can really create a paved road. But I think just about that helping with the defaults, right? And still leaving the flexibility. But I think it's a great question because honestly, this is a repeating theme I'm talking almost every day on, right? That people, where is the balance? Where is the balance between flexibility and kind of making things easier? But great question.
Thank you, Luboš. David.
Yeah, to add a little bit to it, what I think is pretty hard is to hit the sweet point in the default in each organization, because everybody works completely different. So what works for one company will probably not work for second one, because they are working a little bit differently. But what we found, it's typically helpful that if we are designing this kind of, how to say, contracts or responsibilities, we are typically using some agile practice which is called social contracting. And basically, it's having the platform people and, for example, some application people sit together and describe contract between them in the way, we need you to do this, we need you to do that. And basically, they will write these rules. They are on some visible space, and they are working by them. On the other hand, what is important, these rules can change in the time, so you should run these meetings. And it typically works very well because both sides then know what to expect from the other side. And if the expectations are not working, they can discuss why they are not working. And I think that's very important because it's closing the feedback loops, and everybody knows what the other side of the company will do for them.
Yeah, I think what Jukka said is really important. You can't stifle innovation. So if a team needs something new, allow them to build it. But then with what David said, I think my interpretation is allow them to build it, but use that consulting period where you can determine if and how you can support it and turn it into a service too. So you get best of both worlds. You don't leave them out on their own. And to me, that's a significant element of the whole SRE contract.
Yeah, I have a few points to that. I really liked what Luboš says about object-oriented programming and inheritance, because this was kind of pattern, and the anti-pattern was the kind of God object, when everything had to be class and everything has to be interpreted and everything has to be in design pattern and everything has to be optimized. And the same thing is happening like while companies are adopting Scrum, so they follow the rules to the point, and it also kind of golden path, and not everything is suitable for the company, and they still do it even though it doesn't bring the value. So that's the one thing. Yes, sorry, I will just say the second thing before I forget it. There's a kind of last chapter of the SRE book, and it's called CRE, and it means Customer Relationship Reliability Engineering, and it's really like setting up the SLA that both the producer and consumer are happy. So that's kind of also related to the social contracting. So David.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why the Scrum and all these stuff you mentioned is so popular, and everybody is buying something like God Object or Server Bullet. It's basically that what we are still missing everywhere is the closed feedback loop and ability to say this is wrong and we will not continue it. Because we are still in the mentality that if we are doing something wrong, someone should be accountable, and we should somehow say that this is bad and maybe punish. But in the real world, if you are showing that this is not right approach, it's also giving a big value, because if you can show it early, it means that you are more more able to find a better way or the ideal way for you. So basically having a lot of failures during your development cycle or during your transformation cycles is very important, because that means that you are still innovating, because innovation without failures is not possible.
Outages in production. So we were usually starting with Andy. So let's start with Tomáš.
So is there a concrete question?
I can formulate it if you want. What was your experience with outage in production that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, there's definitely a few. I think, yeah, there was one where I think the worst outages are always when the issue is not like single, when the root causes are like in 2+, because then as you sort of kind of try to remediate the issue as quickly as possible, you're like kind of debugging, looking what's wrong, right? And then you maybe fix one, but the other pops up, or vice versa, and then you're kind of confused. You think that you're actually not fixing the core issue, right? And you just keep kind of jumping in between the different root causes, and you kind of never finish. There's always one lingering. And we had one similar issue like this. I think Jiří has more detailed description of that. But I think what's really important in those situations is first customer communication. So being very honest about what's happening, keep people informed, because there might be folks who are just using your product inside some very important C-level meeting, and if it just stops working, that sends out a really bad signal. And if your social or your customer support is like completely silent, and it just feels like basically you went out of business and there's no information whatsoever, then it can really hurt the trust of the brand. And so I think that's like pivotal. And then second, of course, try to fix it as quickly as possible, but not necessarily by fixing the core issue, right? But just remediating and getting back online as quickly as possible, which might mean hacks here and there, but try to spin everything up again as quickly as possible and get those 9s up again, and then maybe you can focus on the real root cause analysis and problem solution and not all those things. Yeah, so I would probably pass it on to Jiří to kind of describe it in more detail.
I think Luboš has something to say, so sorry, Jiří, I will get back to you.
I didn't want to take word from Jiří. Jiří, go ahead. I will then chime in.
Yeah, we had a pretty nasty outage recently, and on top of what Tomáš was saying about the communication, I think where we found a big gap was the whole incident management process, because we as a company tend to do pretty well in terms of reliability, and now suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where the whole service was down, the root cause was not known, we didn't know what the remediation steps were, and it turned out that we had very little practice in terms of managing the entire life cycle of the incident. So we are struggling to open the Zoom bridge, decide who was the leader, who would communicate to customer care, who would be keeping track of the tasks, and it was initially very chaotic to actually resolve the whole situation. And this brought us to actually setting up the disaster role play, which I believe is a key element to having a solid incident response. Because then, if you find yourself in this tricky situation and the world is on fire, you have everything in your finger memory. You know that you need to open incident channel on Slack. You need to create the Zoom bridge. You need to pull in customer support, inform the relevant stakeholders. There needs to be a leader. There needs to be some scribe who takes the notes. People need to take clear action. There needs to be someone overseeing the whole process. And I feel like this is where a lot of folks will find their gaps if they find themselves in a situation which is seriously threatening the availability of their service. They need to make sure they understand what steps they need to take, not just from the technical perspective, but also from the whole incident management point of view.
Luboš?
Yeah, so I don't have concrete example. I mean, probably plenty of production incidents, but just a couple of thoughts from me. I think it's a great topic because, yeah, again, we're quoting Google DORA, right? It's the 5th DevOps outcome metrics that's clearly correlating with business, how well they do, right? So if you look at a recent example, was it 2 months back where Facebook was off? Was it more like a couple of hours or almost all day, right? That, of course, if that happened to a site like Facebook every week, of course, you can then argue what their commercial success would be like, right? If you're a customer of such a big sort of service or any of your sort of famous streaming service as well, right? You will probably be sort of very unhappy. So it's just for the context, right? Of course, everyone understands. But what I find the most sort of interesting about all of this is just to really break the silos, right? And really bring the operational excellence to the product team directly, right? So, and I still face it day in, day out. Lots of engineers don't realize, they think, okay, I think about my code, I write a code, I just want to play around it. But it's only until they're kind of really exposed to, the real sort of world, what's actually happening, how the applications run. If there is an outage, really get them on the call. And I said, I think too much before, really then pushing the boundaries of people that, okay, we're not here to design proper solution of this. We don't have 2 weeks to develop proper solution. We have to fix quickly, right? We have, candidates or clients, on the line. And I also not just the operational excellence. I think it's very interesting, right? Setting up root cause analysis calls, really get the whole team on it, really get that accountability again back to the team. Hey, this is your stuff, guys. What's happening? Let's figure out together what's wrong. What can we do to fix it? And also what I find very, very interesting is cyber siege. I'm not sure if you have experienced, we have done these competitions in the past, in our firm, which I think you can just subscribe to. It's essentially like a a couple of people sign up, and then you have your own virtual like equivalent of VPC in AWS. You also have own account, a couple of services there, and then you're competing with each other with in complete availability. So there's like someone like a hacker that's trying to hack all of your services at the same time. They do the same thing for all of your services. I don't know, it could be SQL injection, whatever. And your task is to restore your service as fast as possible. And the longer it is down, the more penalty points you get. And then it's like a leaderboard. So I think this I find really interesting to actually identify the best talent. I call them the best hackers. How quickly they really can get to the resolution, especially for applications we've never seen before, right? But yeah, it's just an interesting topic. I think there's so much stuff you can talk about. I'll just pause myself now and let David to speak.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, I wanted to add only a few points here, because what I like is your approach with leaderboards and these stuff. Because what then you can do, you can just go to the teams, remove top 3 people, and look if you are still able to get the incidents done correctly. Because I think that's also important to know that your organization is not sitting on 2 people there who are able to restore from the incident.
Yeah, if I can add some thoughts as well.
Yes.
Incidents happen. It's the nature of things. We need to be clear in the design phase. So design thinking is a significant part of things. There was a time when we thought ITIL was a way for preventing incidents and unexpected actions, but the change advisory board really didn't observe or have the understanding of what a change might be, and incidents happened. Now we've got automated processes with CI/CD and test-driven development and various other things, as Luboš said with Facebook. Even with the best automated systems, change have unexpected consequences. So we've got to think through the whole process. And the problem with a lot of automation is change can happen at a larger scale and a lot more quickly than previously. So we've got to be very careful there. Testing and some of the principles that were mentioned around siege mentality and various other things are really important. So we should be testing routinely. I used to work for Jesse Robbins, and he was called the master of disaster at AWS. He used to go and pull switches and things all of the time. We need to start engaging in that sort of mentality. I've been fairly fortunate, and I've brought systems down all over the place, but I've worked in an environment where, of course, one takes the mickey out of oneself for doing so, and your peers have a joke. But I've always worked in an environment where you got blame-free postmortems, and those are critical. You've got to be confident to come forward and say, made a mistake, but now the next thing is learn from it. And something a UK bank called Monzo have pioneered is really important too, and that's public postmortem, where they put up online what occurred. Everybody has failures, so I think we've got to learn through the whole process how to be clearer, how to learn, and how to protect those people. Because on the times I've brought systems down, I've been devastated. And it's taken days, weeks for me to recover that confidence. And people are critically important here.
I like all the approaches. I think I learned a lot of just in the past few minutes. I was thinking about the topic which is related to outages, how to prevent them. And one is called the chaos engineering or the chaos monkey. And the other is called the Toyota production system undone code, where you can stop the manufacturing line anytime when there's anything goes wrong, and everyone gets together and starts solving it. And to the second, companies were trying to copy it, but they were forgetting about the blameless for something like blameless things, and also every outage is learning opportunity. So in Toyota, when anyone put the undone code, they stopped and went and thanked him for the learning opportunity he would bring to them. So I think companies should also be thankful for the one who's causing most of the outages, because he's enabled the company to learn. And
provided they don't do it time and time again.
Yeah, and if they don't have such hackers that are causing outages, they should implement them with chaos engineering. That's my 5 cents to this.
Yeah, I have my 5 cents to this, which I typically run when a lot of, how to say, big organizations who are not in DevOps story and who don't have reliable CI/CD system start speaking about chaos engineering. It's getting really weird, and my typical answer is that you are the best chaos monkey now, so you don't need it. Just work as you do, and the time for this will come, because what is very important, these concepts are great, but you have to be pretty advanced as a company in technology to even think about doing something like that, because otherwise it can very quickly kill you.
Yeah, maybe just my 2 cents is like I really like what Netflix is doing, for example, right? They're literally doing that sort of as well, sort of in live production. I think we're really just starting, but I think, to be completely honest, this is one of those topics where I have to use your argument, David. Prior in the warm-up session, that we're a financial institution. So I think chaos engineering in people's minds is just no, don't mess it. Like, just imagine like someone is gonna be playing with your sort of production account somewhere, right? With your trading activity, whatever. Oh, it was just chaos engineering. So we tried that. Okay, it was just you. No one else was impacted. But yeah, we just made a trade on you worth $2 million. So it's, yeah, I think chaos engineering in our context is a little bit sort of tricky to think about. But I think the future is there, right? We're, depending on the context, we try to do, depending on the maturity of the teams, at least some sort of manual sort of game days, we call it. Like, okay, it's just simulation, it's not real production. That's, I think, even that is getting a little bit sort of tense. But on production, I think we're barely just starting. So I think it's going to be a journey. But I definitely believe that's the most advanced approach. I totally agree with you, David. It's a long way for big corporations to go, especially us.
Thank you. Andy?
Can I just pick up? I forgive me, I forgot who said it, but somebody really said systems are complex and there are a lot of failures, or potential areas of failure. And one of the things that I continually have to think through when I hear, especially more seasoned leaders saying things, is what's the root cause? And I think we've now got to get to a point where, if you come back to platform teams and various other things, there probably isn't a root cause. There are causal factors, and that might be technology or process, but people who have been very seasoned often look for the one thing to pin things on. Please, let's make sure that people start thinking about the causal factors rather than the one thing.
Yeah, I think that you just described the thing I started reading recently. It's called system thinking, and it's exactly that. And I have one more point for the customer communication and root cause analysis. What was difficult for me was to explain the problem in the language that customer can understand. That's really difficult. And I think I'm still like 50% able to do that.
Yeah, but to just give 5 cents to this, I think this is very hard. And also to root causes, what is important is sometimes really be sure that it's brain-free, because sometimes the root cause is not a technology issue, but management decision to go this way. But nobody typically say it's this.
But there's going to be a DNS problem somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah, because from my history, when I was still in consulting, the biggest, the worst sentence I was hearing from my manager was, "It's my manager decision and my management risk." And it typically means that customers were calling me at the 2 a.m. for his risk. And that's something we still need to have in mind, that sometimes failures will happen because there is not enough budget or not enough pool of people to implement something in a good way. And sometimes it's better to have it even badly than not have it at all, because it can mean that even especially for the small companies, it can be very easily out of the market.
I echo Thomas's point, testing in production and never release on a Friday.
Exactly.
I just wanted to say one more point.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick reaction to.
So I'll go.
Yeah, go. Okay, go ahead.
No, please, Luboš.
Okay, so sorry, there's a little bit of delay. Sorry. So I just wanted to react to Andy, right? So the point you mentioned around the root cause, I think, yeah, I think you nailed it. I've seen this over and over as well. At times, just this is the root cause. Let's fix it, right? And based on one occasion that happened in 3 years, things suddenly sort of change. I still feel like being transparent and public about it, makes sense. Just make it down, write it down, understand the root cause. If there are multiple of them, let's learn from it. Don't do drastic decisions. But one more angle I wanted to put here is again the regulation, right? Because at times you have incidents that where even regulators get involved, right? So imagine like a financial institution, something happens, maybe there was like some, I don't know, a Chinese wall, right, was maybe breached and someone misused information and did some sort of trading or some sort of malicious activity. Then regulators definitely, they want to understand the root cause, right? What happened, why it happened, and they're really on our back. What do you do so it doesn't happen again? And then unfortunately, even if it's just a one occurrence, even in 10 years, we'll still have to do something about it. So unfortunately, there are cases where, this are kind of inevitable. Yeah, it was just one occurrence. And of course, we can, look into what we hire and like what people we hire and sort of teach people. But unfortunately, there are cases where it's kind of inevitable and you have to show to regulators that you actually reacted on a root cause. So yeah, that becomes a little bit harder. But I agree. Otherwise, yeah, if it's not regulatory driven, absolutely, yeah, try to just be smart about it.
Yeah, I think we get somehow stuck to the theoretical concepts, and I would like to ask somebody from the audience if they want to ask a question or if they have like experience to share about their outages. Please raise your hand. Jirka?
Yeah, I can maybe share more specific details about the outage that we are talking about with Tomáš at the beginning of this like block of topics. So we are running most of our application workloads on Kubernetes, and we were relying on KOps to set up the Kubernetes cluster. And at some point, we received a lot of alerts in our incidents channel, so we started investigating what was going on. And we found out that the Kubernetes cluster for production was completely empty. There were no namespaces, no pods, just nothing. There was a bunch of errors in the logs that were coming from the CNI. And initially we were like completely clueless what had happened. So we decided that we will, just to be sure that we will restore our service, we decided to spin up a new Kubernetes cluster, and we provisioned all our backend services and all the integrations from scratch. And once we were fully up and running, we started investigating what was the actual root cause. And it was such a silly bug, because we were relying on etcd manager to provision the etcd cluster for the Kubernetes control plane. And we were taking backups of the etcd state in regular intervals, and we were storing those backups to S3. And at some point, since the cluster was running like for a long time, over multiple years, the amount of data that the backups were taking was immense, and we decided to do a cleanup of those backups. And it turned out that in the same S3 folder as the etcd manager was taking the backups, there was some file that was created when the cluster was like initiated, and it was really sitting under the backup folder. And we set up an S3 lifecycle policy that deleted everything in the bucket that was older than like X days. And it also deleted this one like control file or log file. And as soon as this happened, the etcd manager decided, I have a bunch of nodes running, but I don't have this control file in the S3 bucket. So I'm assuming this is a new cluster. Let's reinitialize. And it wiped all our Kubernetes state, all our workloads. So that was a tricky one to actually debug and find the root cause.
Thank you, Jirka. So, any other outage worth sharing? Maybe Luboš.
Yeah, maybe I can share one. It's not that sort of fancy, but there's many kind of from the business perspective, but I won't be sharing because at times when it comes to people's money, right, you don't want to be sort of sharing some sort of bad incident that happened. But yeah, from DevOps, I guess, or the CI/CD space, yeah, maybe one recently where when it kind of boils down that there's maybe lack of control in some of the CI/CD tools, or maybe typical scenario that the engineers developing that didn't think of. And what was it more concrete, right? So essentially users or developers in our firm started noticing Bitbucket that we're using internally started sort of being slower. We're kind of hosting it ourselves. It was slower, git pull, git push was like slower and slower to a point where it almost seemed like unresponsive, the service. The service itself was, very, very overloaded. It took a bit of a time to just figure out what's basically going on. It turned out to be that actually we were using Atlassian stack. So Jira was just, or actually we saw lots of requests from Jira, hitting sort of Bitbucket. And it turned out to be like, a bit of a mystery sort of solving. But in the end, we just realized that it was caused by the built-in sort of Atlassian integration between Jira and Bitbucket. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but if you open Jira, you can take a look at the pull requests and other data from Bitbucket, which is visible directly for a given Jira ticket. And some teams were doing some very, very bad practice of misusing one Jira issue key for thousands of commits. It was never spotted. They probably have like some rep sort of CI/CD, and it reached to a point where at some point it meant that the way the integration is designed, Jira basically just killed Bitbucket in HTTP requests. It was just pumping that with the requests to just fetch all information from Bitbucket. But it was a tricky one because it just took a long time to figure out what's actually going on. We got even Atlassian involved. It turned out that we're not the only firm that other sort of customers found it. But yeah, from the engineering standpoint, it was pretty bad because it took like 2 days actually in the end before all these or until all these sort of issues were resolved. And it wasn't that it took us 2 days to figure out what's wrong, but it's just because fixing the root cause just took fairly long time as well because the data itself in Jira was fairly sort of significant. So it's sometimes even simple things like this when you're in charge in the platform team. Yeah, it's clear to me that we should just rely on SaaS solutions as much as we can, right? We just really rely on Atlassian and their sort of Jira Cloud offering. But yeah, this is one of those examples where I definitely felt bad, right? Because I think the customer experience was pretty rubbish from engineer's perspective.
Thank you, Luboš. Andy?
Yeah, I've got one that overlaps on several of the topics we've been talking about, from platform engineering and innovation and root cause, really. An organization have made some technology choices to deploy a number of shared services, which they were offering up to development teams. But there was relatively little communication between them, and they'd chosen to implement RabbitMQ as a message broker and offer that as effectively an IoT broker to a number of organizations. And without any good practice, the development team had gone off and they built an application, but they'd armed it for the future. So they considered lots of topics that they weren't going to use as they built the application. They were publishing messages to RabbitMQ, but there was no consumer for them. So RabbitMQ filled up and killed the platform at the end of the day. Now, with the platform team helping the enabling team, they'd have actually been able to go off and say, well, this is the mechanism through which you should use this. Or if the enabling team had been given the freedom to go off and build something of their own, they may have chosen a different technology like Kafka. But nonetheless, this resulted in an outage and the perception that a number of products were performing poorly when actually the design constraints that should have been considered weren't met. Comes down to people and process again, I guess, but quite painful.
Thank you, Andy.
Oh, I just have one more thing to compound that. It was a point where there was actually zero monitoring of the platform too. So there was a blind spot whilst this was building up, which should have been observed.
Yeah, I was checking the topic of observability, and it's related to the test-driven development. That if you're implementing change or solving an incident or anything, you should first implement the monitoring to measure the numbers or to have some like data. And once the change is ready, you deploy it, and you are still using the same monitoring you implemented, but you are expecting some results. And if the results is not coming, there's either a problem with the monitoring or with the change you did. And if you didn't do any monitoring ahead, then you're just blind.
Yeah, exactly. But with monitoring or observability, there is one tricky stuff. How do you know where the blind spot is? Because how do you know that there is something you are not monitoring? And it's similar with the backups.
Unknowns. The unknown unknowns, absolutely.
Which is fine, it will happen all the time. Then you need a good postmortem process to learn from it, fix it, and then ideally hope that it doesn't have the same issue does not hit you ever again, and it's an iterative process.
Yeah, exactly. But this is really about culture. It's not technology problem in reality, and that's I think that's why it's even more complex to solve.
Yeah, a kind of extreme example I have from this what you just said, David, is that I've also seen that teams are kind of responsible for something, and they will be monitoring so much stuff. Like it's really exciting. Like they would have Kibana, Grafana. They would show like, okay, this is how it works for last sort of 2 months. It seems like it's 99%, 999 sort of availability. Then actually ask the customers, and they say, hey, this service doesn't work like 2-3 times a day. How come? Like how is that sort of possible, right? And then that's also I think a sort of beauty, right? To just break that silo. Like okay, talk to the team responsible for it. You guys, you are accountable. What you're showing me here is like your service availability, measured just on the host directly. You're not measuring all the other sort of network hops from the customer perspective. Again, the SRE sort of angle, and this is also interesting, right? Just I call it perception of reality, right? That often the accountable teams just have sort of skewed perception of reality, where they think their service is healthy, when in fact it's not observed that way by customers, right? So, and then millions of dollars can be used on working on monitoring that doesn't actually bring the value back to the customer. So yeah, I'm getting definitely to SRE topic then.
Yeah, and Jirka mentioned earlier, war rooms, actually practicing scenarios of failure, because the last thing you can tolerate in a mission critical system is working out how to fix it when the problem's occurring.
Well,
Yeah,
I have some.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on, David.
Okay, maybe that's when we are speaking about the next big thing. Maybe this is the very silent big thing in behind IT. What's happening? That we are really designing the systems which can fail, and we are learning from that, because I think that's very new concept in reality, and it's very silent in behind. Nobody's speaking much about it, but I think this is a big change, because if I look 20 years ago when everyone was about 5 nines or something like that, and it's not such big topics today.
Yeah, to connect it to that, I mean, this is exactly what the term testing in production kind of means, right? It was I'm not sure if everybody perceives it the same, but a few years back, that was like you would go to hell for that, right? You would have to have like 3 other pre-environments where you test it a number of times, and then maybe you get to production if you get the like a magic word or whatever, right? But like today, we are kind of, I think we've learned that software can be only reliable as much as the real world can be reliable, right? And many different sort of things happen. The speed of light is limited, and people can break cables, and so that's just the reality of the situation. And so we just have to learn how to quickly remediate, how to deal with those situations, as opposed to just simply trying to emulate a world where those things don't happen ever, which is a complete illusion, right?
Thank you, Andy.
Well, this comes down to some engineering rigor, and that comes with cost. If you want to reduce the risk of, and we all test in production, because often your pre-production environments are not even logically the same as your production environments, let alone physically the same. And the number of organizations I talk to who have limited or no observability on their pre-production environments is staggering. Like, we only observe in production. Well, everything comes through this chain. You're running all of these tests. Surely you can actually gain a lot of insights. And well, it's the cost. We don't have observability in pre-production. Well, that's just your security gate. It makes me. It's not a very scientific approach.
I remembered the root cause that Jirka described about the file on the S3. I think that was kind of missing documentation, and there are a lot of things that are part of the system, but they are not visible in the system, and a lot of the hidden dependencies and information that we don't know. And it can be like log4j, the error that was there for, I don't know, since 2013, hidden and sleeping before it was discovered. And also it comes back to the Agile Manifesto, where there are like for comparison of two things, and people only take seriously the one that are like with higher priority, but completely forget about the one with the lower priority. So the roles are processes and tools, comprehensive documentation, contract negotiation, and following the plan. So it's like a full circle, because implementing the more important things first is good, but it doesn't end if you don't do the second things as well, the second priorities. These 4 things I read. And also, have you ever did something like discovering the single point of failure in the system, like go to do some like value stream mapping or something, and go through step by step through the system, and we're thinking like, if I will switch this off, or if this will fall, should the system fall as a whole? Do you have experience with that? That's my question.
I don't think we are doing sort of post analysis of this, but we certainly do think about this during the architecture phase. So we ask ourselves this pretty frequently, and actually it's a pretty hot topic for certain, let's say, technologies that are out there today, where some of them might actually prefer a more centralized approach. And so I think we are discussing this pretty frequently. There's patterns like API gateways and GraphQL, servers and stuff like that. And so we try to always question these designs and these technologies for exactly the single point of failure perspective. So we definitely do it in the pre-phase rather than post.
Thank you. Andy? You're muted.
I think the single point of failure, like the root cause, are really much more difficult concepts these days to grasp. I used to run a bunch of SMP boxes, huge boxes. Yeah, you put your power supplies in them, but there was a single point of failure at the end of the day. Now with distributed workloads and mesh networks and etcd, as was mentioned by Jirka earlier, it's an awful lot harder. And the complexities are nuanced. Is it a latency problem between 2 availability zones? That's not really a single point of failure in my mind. So we build these massively tolerant, resilient systems. It gets harder to understand that single point of failure. And I'll come back to my earlier joke. At the end of the day, it's always DNS.
Yeah, but actually, that is questionable if in such complex system there is single point of failure anymore, because still, if you are using Kubernetes, you are applying some manifest when you are asking for something, and you are trusting the whole cluster that it do what is asked for. So basically, it's based on promises and trust, and that's something which needs to be, how to say, kept in mind, because then if you get into resource management and burstable workload, guaranteed workload, and quota setting and limits and requests, it's exploding in the theory. How do you want to even make sure that your mission critical workload is running, for example? Because these systems hides a lot of complexity from you. but it's still that.
We have a question from one of the fellow Jitters, and it's what are the best approach steps to consider while integrating a completely new service or application? It's a short question, but it's like very long answer, right? I would say microservices, 12 factors or something like that. Domain-driven device design, hexagon architecture. There's so many like patterns, and there are always like decisions of like what's the trade-off? What will it bring us and what it will cost us? Andy?
Yeah, I take it back to first principles. Far too often we start designing a new service without sufficient knowledge of the user or of the business requirements. And we make technology choices really on. So I think it's first principles. Make sure you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to do before you do anything.
Luboš?
Yeah, to me, I'm not sure whether the question was new service completely like developing it or integrating. So if I read it, especially as integrating, meaning say we have a plant, we have stuff, and we just want to integrate something new. I think one important element to me is service relationship management, right? So if there are more services that come at play, how do we sort of integrate it so that it's clear when the boundaries sort of lie, right? So who's responsible for what? And one important concept, which is actually a banking sort of thingy, but it's applicable very widely. It's PCI DSS, which just for the record, Amazon, for example, right, they implemented fully for their services. And that's again, like to me, state of the art kind of integration, service level integration. So it's, I'm not sure that was exactly a question of who was asking there, but to me, anytime when it comes to new service integration, really, it's definitely everything that Andy said. Be clear about why you actually need it, but once that's clear and you start designing it, make sure you know where your boundaries lie, right, within the service. What's responsibility of this service? What's the responsibility of this service? So we can then build those contracts back to the customer. Which, if you think about this today, it's pretty much every single customer does, right? It's never just one firm. We provide you a service, but we base our service on an internal service. We say a platform team, and then we base it on maybe AWS offering. So it's like it's very, very complex, like typical, right? What the end customer gets. So the SRM is even more important. So, but I think it's often overlooked. Yeah, I can definitely testify.
Thank you, Luboš. Tomáš?
Yeah, I would like to definitely expand on what Andy was saying, and basically turn, like, I think the answer to this question is a question. I think it's what do you need? Like I don't, that there's no single right solution for anything. But in general, sort of, as I've been through some projects, there is one commonality that I found that might be helpful, and that's just keep it as simple as possible. The simplest solution is usually the best. And so, like, if you want to show up, put up a website, just, I don't know, go to webflow.com or just like upload a static file to S3, like, don't overthink it. Just do it as cheapest, as simple as most. Basically, the most stupidest solution is usually the best because it's the least complex. There's no maintenance, and yeah. So this is what I always try to use.
Ties back to even challenging the business requirements, even if you get them, like, ask why. If someone is asking you for a certain amount of nines or for certain capabilities, try to understand why and try to trim off as much fat as you can and start really simple, because maybe the requirements that made it through down to you, who's responsible for implementing the service, are just some like best guesses, and it can turn out that if you make a compromise somewhere, you can deliver the service, much faster or at a much lower cost. So really deeply understanding the needs of the end customer at the end of the day is what matters and what will guide you to make the right decisions for the architecture and design.
I have an extension to the question. So imagine instead of the new service or application, let's take some like certification process or regulation that you need to adapt to, and you cannot say no, you just have to do it. So what will be your thinking in this case? Similar to the application, but it's something that you just are forced to do.
Well, most regulation comes down to saying what you do and proving that you do it. So read the regulation, obviously. Show what technical measures you have either implemented or you need to implement, and then provide the evidence as in as automated as fashion as possible. So through, if it's a code base, proving it's been untouched through something like a CI/CD product that you audit and you output all of the results for. It's a huge question area, but it does come down to saying what you do and as closely as possible automating the proof that you do it.
Yeah, I think we are kind of closing to the end, coming closer to the end, and I think Lubos had to leave already because he had some other programs starting from 8:45, if I remember correctly. So thank you, Lubos, and I will just do some like last round if there are any more questions. Nothing on Slido, nothing on the chat, so I assume no more questions. So what will be your like last message to the audience? What was the kind of the purpose of the reason you come to this discussion, and what will be the impact on the audience that come, and something like that? So we can pick the usual order and start with Andy.
So since we started off around the topic of DevOps, let me just return to that. We've got a number of practitioners on here who are given their own time, so they're clearly passionate about making DevOps work. It's our responsibility to make that work. And I think there is, in some parts, a loss of faith that DevOps is working. I think it's the natural thing each industry needs, so it's now down to us to continue to niggle, to persuade, to teach, to empower people to take some of those philosophy forward.
Thank you. David?
For me, maybe let's take it little more from the single human perspective, because what I learned is if you are in the environment when you see that things are not doing correctly, or you want to practice on DevOps more, or you want to change something, and it's not happening in the organization, just stand up and start doing the things. Because there can happen only because typically two stuff happen. One is that you will succeed and organization will change. And second is that you will find a strong resistance, and then you know that you are on the wrong place. So basically, don't be afraid of trying new things. And if they are not working, maybe consider if it's the right place for you.
Thank you, David. Jirka?
From my perspective, the technology and the world we live in is getting more and more complex. And I believe that setting up internal platform teams can bring a lot of efficiency and velocity boost to the product engineering, to the product organization. And it's definitely an area where I see a lot of traction. There is a lot of new tools like Backstage from Spotify. There is a whole new community around people running internal platform teams. It seems to be a pretty hot and quickly evolving space. So I encourage everybody to start thinking how they could benefit from internal platform teams in their organization and kick off that conversation. Exactly as David was saying, like if you can make a good case for it, then go for it. Try to get the investment, try to get a buy-in. if this is something that can bring the business a lot of benefit and you can sell the idea, then maybe it's time for you to look around.
Thank you, Jirka and Tomáš.
Yeah, maybe I'll approach this from a more philosophical angle. I think throughout the discussion, we've demonstrated that a lot of the sort of materials and approaches and practices and all these cool labels that you read from Netflix blog posts and stuff like that, you need to approach them all with a grain of salt, and you always need to think about what was the situation like when they were looking for a solution, right? And what is your situation? And how those situations are actually comparable. Do you even have the same set of problems, right? So instead of just checking boxes of all the cool things and the cool stuff that's out there, you actually are solving your own problems that you have currently. And I think that's what you should really care about. And so it's more about the how than about the what you do.
Okay, so I would like to thank to all the speakers, to all the audience, and my kind of last message is why we are doing this. This Prague DevOps Meetup is a platform for sharing. Currently, we are struggling with the pandemic, so I hope that next month in March there will be few talks, not online but offline or hybrid. And I welcome everyone who is willing to share their information, their experience. And the idea is that we will have like normal talks every second month, and the month in the between we can have like the panel discussion like this. So if you like it, you can rate us on the meetup.com. You can send me messages, or there will be a questionnaire that we are for feedbacks, and we will like you to fill it. And I also like to thank my colleague Pavel, who is co-organizer of this and who also recommend me the speakers. And also thanks in person to Andy and David and Jirka and Tomáš and also Luboš for coming today.